Hey everybody, welcome to Oh God, what are you watching? My name is Cody Lang. My pronouns are they, them. I have a new guest today. I will let them introduce herself, and here we go.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi.
who are you?
Who am I?
Oh,
As an
deep.
existential crisis.
Oh my God. This is a long video now.
No,
Therapy.
my name's Alyssa. My pronouns are she, they. Cody and I have been friends for a long time. We bonded over our love of horror movies and like generally fucked up movies.
Yes,
Um,
very much. Yes.
yeah, I went to school for film. But I also, I just love films and talking about films. So
Yay! I'm so glad you got to come here, and we're actually talking about two movies that center around dysfunctional white families. So
that is also something Cody and I have bonded.
yes, very similar kind of situation. So this worked out perfectly, and I'm really excited that you're here for this. I was gonna ask you though, what kind of movies do you usually, or some favorites that you really like, or even some directors that you really
Okay,
enjoy?
so I actually have, and I have like what I call like an unbreakable top five. These are like always my top five favorite movies. They are Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Donnie Darko, Goodfellas. It's a weird mix. Scream.
Hey. Yes.
And the one that makes people most concerned for my mental state, Requiem for a Dream.
Yes.
One of the only, Cody and I are the only two people I know, and like one friend I had in high school that repeatedly watch Requiem for a Dream. Like, yeah, absolutely, it's so upsetting.
Yeah.
But most people are like, oh my God, I can't watch it more than once. And I'm like, it makes me feel better about my family.
Yeah, it is a weird thing where it's kind of like a favorite album. Me and my like friends used to just like put it on in college too, and just be like, oh, let's watch Requiem for a Dream, and we'd just
It's
be
the vibe.
And it's so weird because we also we had my friend had a recorded version of the monologue that Ellen Burstyn, who is we're going to be talking about later,
Which I brought that monologue into an acting class. Like,
did you really?
Yeah,
Oh
it was
my
a
God.
movement. It was a movement for actors class, and nobody really. The professor was very like yoga and like building that in, and she was like very, very spacey and like took herself too seriously. So nobody else really took the class seriously. But
Sounds
she was
right.
like, bring in a monologue. It can be. She was like, this isn't like a serious theater thing. Bring in any monologue you want to say, and we're gonna like use the words to like go along with like movement and shit, whatever.
Yeah.
I used to go to school for acting, and then I changed over to film because I was like, I can't do this.
I've been there. Yes.
Yeah. Another thing we have in common. But I brought in that monologue from Requiem for a Dream. And so here's me, like 19 years old in college, like, I just wanted to finish with a red dress.
Oh
and my teacher was like, oh, this is you brought in an interesting one. And I was like, yes, I did.
Oh my God, that's great. I'm so funny, Harry.
She did not like me.
Oh no, that's ridiculous. Are there any like films coming up that you're really excited about? Anything specifically?
Yes. So these are movies that have actually like just come out, and I am excited to see them on streaming. I really want to watch it's upcoming horror. I really want to watch Nope.
Yeah, me too.
I'm a big fan of Get Out. Very excited to watch The Black Phone. I love Ethan Hawke.
Yeah.
I think we probably both have that in common.
Yeah, I like him a lot. Yeah.
And also it's like the same producers. It's like Blumhouse, which also made Sinister with Ethan Hawke. And Ethan Hawke is the antagonist in Black Phone. He's the protagonist in Sinister. Which I think it'll be really cool to see him play those like kind of dual roles. But Sinister is one of the only more recent horror movies that did like kind of freak me out. I was they do a lot of really good stuff with like underlying music and shit. It's very intense.
Yeah.
So and Black Phone kind of looks like it's going to be that way. And also they announced like the other day that they're putting out a prequel to the movie X.
Oh yes, I saw that.
Which I actually really loved X.
Yeah,
I thought it was fucking great. So I'm excited to see a prequel for that.
I think it's cool that they're also using, is it Mia Goth? They're using her like again to play that character, I think.
Yes.
Which I just saw this yesterday and I was like, oh, okay. And it seems like they're already like almost done with it or something.
Yeah, because I like saw they have like a horror kind of follow. It's like a promo poster already. And I think there's a teaser trailer coming out like this week.
Oh, I think actually today. I think today or something. Yeah, I saw that they were gonna release that. I was like, okay. So
yeah, so there's a lot of upcoming horror I feel like to be excited about. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I think the one I'm like really excited about, I can't even remember what it's called, but
If
Todd
Halloween
Sol-
ends, just say it.
Oh, that's yes. Even though
I am
I have not
also
liked this trilogy, I don't care. I will watch Michael Myers just exist. I'm just so
same.
excited. Don't care. I'm very excited to see how they end it. We'll see if they actually do. But I feel like Jamie Lee Curtis is like, you're gonna end this now, because she tried to do that in like Halloween H2O, and then
Yes.
we found out how
And
that
they were like,
happened.
well, yeah, she's gonna get to send like me about that.
Yeah,
So,
you're like, you do kill him, and it's like, and then she was
but
like,
then
well,
he's
just
gonna
kill
be
me
in
off.
space.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. They're
No,
just
but what are you excited about? Sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. Just Todd Solondz has a new movie coming out, who directed Happiness, which we're going to talk about later.
He is one, and he is one of my favorite directors that I would
Yes,
name. Really
it's going to
recommend.
be like Colin Farrell and Rachel Weisz are both in it, which I think I'll be really excited. Penelope Cruz was originally supposed to be it, which I was very
Oh,
excited for.
I love her
Then
too.
she dropped out, and I was like, "Fuck!" But then we got like a reunion of Colin and Rachel from like The Lobster, so I was like, "Let's
Yes.
do it." So I'm very excited and very curious to see what's going to happen there. But
Yeah,
let
I
us
love.
dive into Another Happy Day, directed by Sam Levinson.
I
Would
didn't know until I started watching it, and then
Yeah.
that I have some very interesting thoughts about that.
Yeah, see, and this was something I had watched this movie a little after it came out, when Blockbuster was actually still a thing. I
Yeah.
went there and they were like closing, and I bought like a bunch of movies, and that was one I was like, this is probably going to be terrible. I was like, I've never heard of it, but the cast looks amazing.
But Ellen Burstyn's on the DVD cover, so sure.
Yes, I was like, this is Ellen Burstyn, Ellen Barkin, and then like Ezra Miller for the time. And I was like, Demi Moore, Thomas Hayden Church. Like there was like just a bunch of
Yeah.
people. And then Siobhan Fallon Hogan, who I absolutely love
Yes.
so much.
And
So
then
I was
Kate
just like,
Bosworth shows up for like a cute
yes,
5 minutes.
yes, it's there was just, I was like, how did you get all these people together and then no one watched this? I was like, what the fuck? So then I like just bought it, and I actually I was gonna watch it one day, and a friend of mine gave me like a weed brownie that was covered in like oil, and they had it for a while.
Oh
And I was
no.
like, and so I was like, I was like heading home to watch Another Happy Day with my boyfriend at the time, and I ate that, and I was like, oh, this is fine. But I didn't realize I shouldn't have ate the whole thing. One thing, I
How
don't
they
do
get you.
edibles are not like great for me, because I immediately body high situations, I'm like, ah! And so like was not prepared at all either for what this movie was going to be. I was like, oh, family drama, whatever. And then I was like,
Oh, and then
oh,
you get to watch Ezra Miller like fucked up as shit, and you're like, I'm gonna die.
yes, exactly. And I was like, yeah, which I ended up having like a panic attack
Yep,
afterwards, and I was like, I
I
think I'm
feel that.
swallowing my tongue. And
Oh
it
no.
was it was awful.
And
But
you're like, and now it's one of my favorite movies.
oh yeah, that's the thing. It's like I had this weird therapeutic, like cathartic experience watching it, because I
Yeah.
was like, and it was weirdly super similar to my life, and
Mhm.
which I've watched other family dramas before and like connected a few dots here and there, but this I was like, this like dynamic and everything is so weirdly specific
Spot
to
on, yeah.
my family, except this family definitely has a lot more money than my family's ever seen. But the ideas and the way they handle certain things and their traumas and
Yeah.
everything, I was like, this hurts. I was like,
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
watching like a home movie almost, and it was just it hurt. Like I was crying the entire time, and I was like,
There is
what the
something about
fuck?
there's a specific dynamic between one of the brothers and there's like some specific qualities that I about those two characters that match me and my brother.
Oh
And
really?
I was like, ah.
Oh no, yes, that's what it was. And like, see, my brother, who I like, wasn't close with growing up, but we're like good now. He reminded me a lot of like Ezra Miller's character,
Mhm.
and a combination of the cousin who's like the little rapper guy or whatever, who's like unfucking bearable.
It's like an
It's like,
absolute little shit. Every dude in my hometown that didn't make it anywhere, he
yes,
hangs out, he
that's
parties,
him.
he tries to date high school girls.
Yes, it's just gross across the board. Yeah,
No,
like
thank you.
him and Ezra Miller kind of combined, and I was just like, these two characters, I was like, those are like a combo of like my brother. And then like the mom Ellen Barkin reminded me of like my mom dealing with like her past and with her ex, my father, and like my father's like inability to really grapple with what happened with us.
Take
And I'm like,
responsibility. Yeah.
yes,
Personal responsibility
and
is
that's the
out the
thing.
window.
Yes, and I'm trying not to get like too personal with myself because I don't want, I don't think my family's gonna watch this by any means.
But like try not to shred my whole family on the
yeah,
internet.
exactly. So I'm
I
like,
know,
but
I thought about, I'm like, oh, okay.
well,
Let's
and it's another thing where it's like I ended up like I think sending it to my mom and like my brother and my grandma. I was like, y'all need to watch this because it's our family, and they were like,
y'all need to watch this and then go to therapy.
I know exactly. See, this is why I am the way. Yes,
this is what you've done to me.
I know, and they were like, well, I don't really see it as like the same. I was like, it's okay. I was like, well, it's because you don't see yourself and you don't see the thing. So anyways, let's get to like the kind of the story, which if you want to explain, do you want to explain like a bare bones kind of idea of what is happening with the story? Yeah, go for it.
So basically a very dysfunctional family. Wait, which I also just realized both families center around sets of like multiple sisters who are in different points in their lives.
Yeah.
But so it centers on mostly Ellen Barkin is one of the sisters, and she has 4 kids. Her oldest son is getting married, and we find out pretty quickly that she's actually pretty estranged from her older son because of some past drama with the dad. And this entire family is coming together at the matriarch Ellen Burstyn's home. And she has Ellen Barkin. She's got this other daughter, Kate Bosworth, who's in college, who has like some very severe self-injury things she's going through. And the whole family is like whispering about it. It's so fucked up. Like the way they treat her. Yes. And it's like a big thing that's like, what state is she going to be in when she shows up? And then she just strolls in halfway through the movie looking totally fine.
Yeah.
And like, and then she's got Ezra Miller, who is an absolutely terrible person. And it's such a shame because they're very talented. Gives a fantastic performance as the teenage child who is grappling with drugs and anxiety and depression. And then a younger son who's about middle school age, which my only major problem, because this is just something that doesn't age well, but was super common at the time, is autistic. My brother is autistic, which is why I say like, there's some things I related to, but so I'm also like, whenever I see a character that is, I'm like, did the person portraying this, are they actually autistic or are they pretending? But the thing is, like, it's kind of like an almost throwaway thing that's mentioned sometimes. And it's like each one of Ellen Barkin's kids has something that's like wrong with them and it's her fault. But the whole point is that it's fucked up the way the family talks about the kids. And like, there's nothing wrong with the kid being autistic. There's nothing wrong with the mental health issues. Like, it's just like the way the family treats them.
Yes. But
her older son, who's getting married, is like the most well-adjusted. And he was raised by his father and his stepmother, played by Demi Moore, who I have a big crush on Demi Moore. And she was so good in this movie that I despised her character. She was somehow one of my least favorite in a movie where everyone is a bad person.
Yeah.
And
I loved her in this movie. She reminded, I don't want to say too much about my personal life, but like stepmom situation reminded me of just that whole thing, which is kind of typical and almost like a caricature, but it's still very real. And it's like, oh my God, I know this woman. And Demi Moore is so great at it, where she has this kind of like aura about her where she's like so like self-assured, like everything, and she's wants to be involved so much. And it kind of used to being like the center of attention because she's always loved Marilyn Monroe, obviously, which is my favorite. I know. I was like,
it's so funny too, because she's brunette in the movie. Like nothing about her like actually harkens to Marilyn Monroe at all.
Except like her attempt at the attitude and her flirtatiousness. So, but yes, besides that, families getting together, and even the father, who is also the father of the son getting married, comes, who used to beat the shit out of Ellen Barkin's character.
And now he's married to Demi Moore, who is like, my husband is great. We're the picture perfect family. Oh, and then also the patriarch of the family, Ellen Burstyn's husband, is kind of in the end of life process. experiencing increasing health problems as the movie goes on, and Ellen Burstyn in particular is dealing with that and like coming to terms with that, and so
Yeah.
that's a big part of her character.
And right when Ellen Barkin and her two sons, like, they arrive, there's an ambulance
They
in the
arrive, right,
driveway,
and there's an ambulance,
and they're
and
like, oh shit, here we go already. And it's like, it's right off the bat. You're
I
like,
was going
oh,
to say, this
drama.
movie does a fantastic job of establishing right away, not only very quickly who, which I think Happiness does as well, who each character is, the exact kind of person they are, but the bleak, dysfunctional yet hilarious environment is
Yes.
set up so perfectly right
Yeah.
away.
It's like everything is always at an 11. And it's like, no matter what the situation, and it's understandable with certain characters because there's so much that just goes unsaid and
Yes.
like no one like wants to approach any kind of trauma. They're always just like, just sweep it under the rug.
Because every time something happens, I'm like, someone is just straight up gonna die at this point, and we have an hour left. Like, this is so horrible. And then it's like the next day.
Yeah, exactly. So like, it ends usually, like, every night it ends with like Ezra Miller, who's going through, like, the character is, their name's Elliot, and this is like a teenager, and they kind of keep his like they keep his like bipolar and everything, like all his issues kind of like under wraps, and like a lot of the family doesn't really believe that there's, you know, anything to it. They're just like, oh, he's just a bad kid and isn't getting enough.
Yeah, the father, because like there are moments where the father kind of is like more lucid and interacts with the family, and it's like the whole time you feel so bad for the father, and then every time he pops up as lucid, he is a piece of shit. He is so terrible in the things he says, and he like says to Ellen Barkin, it's just because you're not tough on him or something like that.
Yeah,
like,
it's like
bullshit boomer old white man.
Yeah, and she's like, he's bipolar, like ADHD, has like a drug issue, anxiety, and he's like, whatever, and just kind of goes back to his TV.
Diagnosed with all of this stuff. He's like gone to rehab. He's like, you know, he needs a lot of support. And then the grandfather's like, sounds like a pansy to me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Elliot, that character doesn't have a good relationship with the grandfather, and there's like a moment where the grandfather's like, you know, he hasn't spoken to me at all, like hasn't said hey anything since he got there.
Why?
Yeah, and it's like, and then, you know, you hear from Elliot, who's like, well, all he does is fucking watch Fox News all the time, and he's like a fucking zombie. And it's like,
it's like an exact, and it's like, this movie was in 2011, so this was this was even before like it was so prevalently known. Like I talked about how, like, you know, the Fox News type of person, but it was like grandpa was already, he has been, and like Ezra Miller already has that awareness of like, this is exactly who my grandpa is, and it's a piece of shit.
Yeah, and it is upsetting because you do see like the generations being completely separated, but because no one ever really talks about what is going on with them, they've just kind of remained separate. And it's kind of like going to a family reunion where it's like, and Elliot's character brings it up too, where it's like the only thing that these people remember are like when you were growing up and before you actually became like who you are today, and they hold on to those memories because it's all they have. And
it's actually one of my favorite lines, because their character says like, it's just the worst moments of my life in snapshots, and that's who they want to hold me as. And I mean, I think about like so many like traumatic or just generally shitty family gatherings I've been to, and I'm like, yeah, like some of the worst moments of my life, and like, yeah, like your family is really, especially as like younger generation, queer person, whatever, like your family is like not there 9 times out of 10 for the moments that you are most thriving and like your most beautiful, full, happy self. And it's like,
and it's a part of you that they don't really want to recognize, whether that be like, you know, with Elliot, with, you know, all the different issues that character has, and like even with, you know, no one talking about Ellen Barkin's past with her ex-husband who used to beat the shit out of her,
and who they welcome the ex-husband. It's such a,
with so open arms.
It seems so unbelievably fucked up, but it is a thing I have seen in real life, not necessarily in my family, but in several families I know. There's a bad marriage, it's separated, and then the wife's side is like, oh, we love our little son-in-law, and it's like, he's a domestic abuser.
Yeah, exactly. And
he's
it's
withholding
like
child support. Like, what do you mean?
And they think like, and it's this thought that like, if we just pretend like everything's okay, it's going to be fine. But you're not recognizing the damage that this has caused so many people around. And then it's their fault for being,
Damaged.
yeah, and like kind of anchored by this because no one wants to recognize it. That's why Ellen Barkin's character the whole time is like, what the fuck? Like,
and it's like, oh, she looks crazy.
Yeah, she's emotional. She always has to make it about her. And it's like
hysterical. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, well, it's because no one wants to recognize the absolute pain and like, craziness that happened to her when she was younger, and like kind of dealing with the fact that she had her two children separated because the father was like, if you leave me, I'm gonna end up taking both of your kids. You cannot take Dylan, my son. So she ends up just taking the daughter, Alice.
Yeah, Kate Bosworth's character.
Yeah, so
it's like revealed that he is like, because something fucked up happened with the custody, but it's basically revealed that he's like, you can take the girl, but if you try to take both, right, then I'll take both from you, and like you'll never see them again. So they literally they have to separate Alice and Dylan, who Alice and Dylan are now really close on their own as grown up. One of the most beautiful things about
it is really cute. That's what's also really cool. I know we're going to be jumping around, but it's cool to even just see how people interact with each other in the background, like where you see like Alice and Dylan like kind of like hugging and like talking, chatting in the background, or like how the aunts are always the two aunts I love so much. They're horrible
because they're the fucking worst.
The worst. And I was like
constantly talking shit about Ellen Barkin and the horrible things that she's going through. And they're like, wow,
they are always drunk. Like
that is exclusively what you see them doing, is drinking and talking shit.
Yes, exactly. And like
for like 4 days straight.
Yes. And it's great because right when we like enter the house, like Ellen Barkin and her two kids enter the house, and the father, the grandfather is like having an issue, so the ambulance is there taking care of it, and Ellen Barkin's character Doris is taking care of him. You can see, and it's filmed from outside. You can see like through the windows, and like Siobhan Fallon Hogan, who's one of Ellen Barkin's sisters, her name is Bonnie.
Yes, I believe
yes.
One of them is Bonnie. Yeah.
Bonnie, and Donna is the other one, the blonde, who is from Mommy Dearest, let us not forget. So so Bonnie, you see her just like sitting on like, I think she's sitting on the counter, and she's just like, oh, Dad's messed up. Like immediately she like lives for the drama. So does Donna. They sit there and they're just like, they just bitch and complain about everything constantly, and they thrive off of it because it's like the only thing they have, where they're just like, oh, we can connect on how messed up everything is, but while also being terrible.
And it's like they seem like the two characters having the best time, even though like they're just as miserable, but it's because they're like,
well, they're also suppressing everything with alcohol and just constantly being drunk through this whole experience because look where they are.
Like if an ambulance is entering the home, like why are you still drinking?
I know, she's like, whatever. Dad's getting fucked up again, so am I. Like, and then she ends up like asking the like paramedic, like she's like, so if you take these pills, like, and you're like 130 pounds, if you take them with like a drink, would you stroke? And she's like, okay, so now you're trying to like abuse these pills.
Right. Mess. She's like, I'm gonna have an educational moment while
she's like has her glasses on, she's like drinking. So it's like a mess. And it's that whole night it gets a little like even better, because then you see like the family after everything, they realize that everything's going to be okay with the grandfather for now. Everyone's kind of being like, oh, well, there's that. Now we can actually kind of talk. So they're all kind of gathered in the living room, and all this, like Bonnie and Donna are messed up, and they start making fun of Elliot, Ezra Miller's character, where they're just like, oh, why are you going through your goth phase? And Elliot is kind of like a dark kind of like teenager, very sarcastic,
moody teenager.
Yeah, absolute smart ass, but also dealing with all these other issues, and then has to be put into this place. And the mom made up this lie that when when Elliot was in rehab, they were like, oh, you were actually in Sweden, is what we told the family.
Yeah.
It's like you're keeping these like things under wraps because they know they'll use that as ammunition like against them.
Also doesn't tell Elliot until they're almost there.
In the driveway.
Oh, by the way. Yeah. And so then like there's this really funny scene later that night where it's just like Elliot's like, I was surprised by how cold Sweden was. And they were like, Sweden? Like you chose to go there? And they're like, well, it was in the summer. And so I thought it might be where it's like, oh.
Yeah, no. Like it's so bad. And they're like it's so funny because like it's Bonnie, Siobhan Fallon Hogan's character, where she's like, she's like, remember when you were wearing like Lynn's spandex or whatever and stuff? Do you
Yeah,
still
like
do that? Ha 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 ha. Like just like laugh. And he's just like,
such
oh
a
my God.
caricature, but at the same time, it's like that, like it's so real.
Yeah, it's because it is so much. And like I have like I was like, I know this woman because she's in my family. And I was like, it's very specific to this very character. And I was like, it may seem ridiculous because it is. And this is an actual person. And it's like I can see someone seeing that character and being like, that's like ridiculous and like over the top. And I'm like, I know, and it's real, and it's
Well, that's
it's
the thing. I can
uncomfortable.
definitely see, and probably why this movie didn't take off. Like normies who grew up
Yeah.
in even semi-functional families,
Yeah.
and like no, mostly, you know, more well-adjusted people
Yeah.
are going to be like, "What is this movie? This is so ridiculous. This is so
Yeah.
crazy." So, and I think also people will probably find it boring how much of it is conversation, and it's like,
Yes.
but it's the subtext.
Yeah, and it's weird because with this and Happiness, they're both um like they're both really dramatic dysfunctional families, but there is a darkness and like humor to the darkness, I guess, which is very
I actually
strange.
wrote, I wrote one of my notes that I wrote for Another Happy Day, which
Yeah.
you can also apply to Happiness, is especially the way that some of the music cues tie in. It
Mhm.
swings wildly between like
Yes.
melodramatic and then
Yeah.
just like very dry, like, haha, dad's dying. This is how it is. And
Yeah.
it's just like a really interesting juxtaposition. And that's how like these kinds of like really fucked up dark family comedies work really well.
Yeah, that's what's also like crazy because they have like these really intense conversations. Then the next scene, like they're like where the grandfather like just goes missing for a little bit, where it's like, oh, he's not in his chair, and they're like, what the fuck? So you're like, boom, da-dum, da-dum, and they're all like
And they're
running around the house,
the
like,
house.
grandma, yeah.
Yes.
And and then like after that, they end up putting him on a leash and like anchoring him to like some like heavy furniture, and he's like, I'm not an animal, and it's like, well,
It's
you
so
can't go wandering in the woods, like because you're like not all there. And but it's
right.
also like, so it's like this terrible thing of like they have to do that, otherwise they have to put him in a home. So it's like, what do we do? And their solution is to just like tie him up like a dog. And it's like, and he's,
And
which I don't understand how he like can't get loose, but
right.
okay. Yeah. But he's just like
Right.
has this walker.
Which,
And
speaking of dog, pretty early, I'm a dog person for anyone who doesn't know
are
me
you?
watching
Yeah.
this.
Same.
Um,
Yes.
and dog characters immediately, I'm like 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Like within like 5 minutes of the movie, this little fluffy, like ridiculous looking dog. I think the dog's name is like Pinky Bones. It's
Oh,
a,
yeah.
such a weird
Yeah.
name.
Because oh, you a stinky pinky. So always
Pinky Pinky,
I was
'cause
like,
she's
I
on
relate
Colin's
to that.
series.
Yes.
Pinky Bones is my favorite character, and he's in this goddamn homemade cowboy outfit. But it's like another, like, 'cause one of the sisters, I think it's not Siobhan Fallon, it's Donna, the blonde
Oh
one.
yeah.
Whose son is the like wannabe white rapper.
Yeah.
He him and Ezra Miller are talking about the dog, and they're like, it's fucking fashion. And then I think Ezra Miller's like, no, and like, because the cousin's like, yeah, like mom's really happy, like she loves doing that. And Ezra Miller's like, no, she's not, or else she would be making fucking clothes with the dog.
Yeah.
There's a comment about how the dog's like old and has gone blind, and that's
I know. And he's like, if the dog could
see itself in that
Emily.
costume. And that's one.
Oh.
It's so good.
It's so cute. And that's yeah, there's like that great moment where it's like because Donna has two kids. One of them's like the obnoxious white rapper wannabe kid who also says the N-word, and it's like really uncomfortable.
And that's
just
really all you need to establish what a shitty fucking character that
yeah. And there is one moment that I actually that character is so hilarious because it reminded me of like my brother and just people I grew up with in South Carolina. And like there's like a moment where
upstate New York, yeah, white people who
yeah,
we'll call this category white people who say the N-word.
Yes, exactly.
It's really bad.
So this character, there's also a moment where like the family's fighting in the dining room, and in the background there's the kitchen, and they're like going at it with each other, like, why Alice says she's not coming to the wedding, like making up rumors. And
right,
like
right. Also, there's just randomly a scene where everyone's woken up and decided that the daughter Alice is no longer coming, and Ellen Barkin's like, no,
and then the grandma hears about it. She's like, why are you doing this? And she's like, what are you talking about? There's nothing.
Her brother.
And while they're like screaming at each other, in the background you see that the cousin, the character, and he's just like has his like pants down and like comes in and like the white tank top and just grabs like a bottle of tequila while they're screaming at each other, and he's just in the background just like and he's like a teenager, and like holds it, and he like has his hand down his pants and just walks away with the bottle of tequila, which is this interesting moment where it's like such a heated, like emotional, intense moment with this humor behind it of this like idiot kid like just
like
grabbing the tequila, just like ignoring
and layering.
Yeah, and there that happens so much too, where it's like after there's the scene where Ezra Miller, Elliot, and Lynn, his mom, are in the room, and he, spits in her face, calls her a cunt, and pushes her on the ground.
It's incredibly intense and so fucked up.
Yeah, and then it cuts to like outside of the room, and the grandpa, who has been on a leash, has now like dragged the leash through the hallway and is up against the door listening. And one of the husbands to Donna and Bonnie, they both have husbands who are barely there. They're always together and just kind of off to the side, being like, also drunk, but like hanging out with each other.
I think you see them like grilling or some shit. Like,
and then you see one of them naked later, like in the montage, just like just drinking
nude in the kitchen in the middle of the night. Yeah.
Yes. And that during the moment with like the leash, like in the hallway, and like you hear like the crying through the door, and then you have one of the husbands being like, with like 2 margaritas, like, Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, under like the leash of the dad. And it's this like just amazing scene of like so much intensity going behind this door, the dad who's hooked to this leash, and then this guy who's like just remaining oblivious. All I want to do is drink, not my problem. And it's like
through, I think, the window, and you see the family like gabbing, having a good time, but you can still hear Ellen Barkin sobbing.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because like you have this intense emotional moment that is very like, it's devastating. I remember when I first saw it, I was like so upset because I've literally been in a moment like with my mom and brother where he's like hurt her, and they've like had these fights and all this stuff going on, and then like off to the side it's just like goofy bullshit over here, and it's like because it's all happening all at once. I was like, there's different layers to all the family, and like no one wants to pay attention to what's going on with Lynn and her mess of a family, so they're just like,
she is just like, she's crying in almost everything. She is just shouting it like, I wrote it in my phone, like I was spending half of the movie going like, which character is just going to unalive themselves at any moment. And it's like, Lynn could be on the roof, like, I'm going to jump right now, and they'd be like, Jack,
yeah, exactly. They'd be like, jump, like, just like, oh my god, yeah, exactly. Just like turn on music. I know, cha real smooth. Just it's so fucked up, and that's kind of like how the wedding is too, which like which is a whole other thing we'll get to, but so like after like the first night of the family getting together, it's just like kind of annoying and stupid, and Elliot ends up going into the grandparents' room looking for some kind of drugs to take because he's still addicted to stuff and needs something to cope, and finds fentanyl, yes, in the drawer.
The worst thing you can find. Like, I was so terrified when they pulled that out. I was like, gonna die.
I know. And when you see their like character in the bathroom, well, also before they go to the bathroom and take it, when they're getting it, the grandfather opens his eyes and is just watching
and
Elliot
sees it happen,
and just watches Elliot leave the room with it, doesn't say anything, and it's like this kind of like, it's like the first time they actually connected with each other, when because otherwise Elliot didn't really say anything to the grandmother, and it's that moment when it's like, okay, well, Elliot's just going away taking my drugs, but and the fact that he doesn't do anything about it and is just like watching it happen, he's like completely like, I think he's just given up on life completely, which
he doesn't care if he dies, he doesn't care if he's in pain, he doesn't care if his grandson dies, like
it's over it. He's over it. Yeah, and he's just like and it's like you hate that about the character because there's still, a family to take care of and also their own person, but but you also see that they are miserable with the state of like where they are in their lives. And that's the thing, is like each character, even though, because I watched it with my roommate the other day, and they were like, it's like, I hate every character, but I like, I also understand where kind of like each one is coming from in their own way. And it's like, it's so weird because it's every character has their issues, and they're all kind of like, you want them to do better and stuff, but it's very real to the point where it's like not people don't always get help, and obviously this is what happens. Like this is
Right,
where
and
it
like
leads
and
to.
it's like the family where it's like I can't come see you guys anymore because my aunts are just going to be drunk and miserable and talking shit, and grandpa's going to be doing this, and it's like yeah, and
It's a
it's
whole
like
mess. And then he has, and then like Elliot, also I'll be saying like Elliot using like he him pronouns, Ezra
that's the
Miller using
character.
they them. Yeah, so like
And
just because
also, this
like
was like this movie came out like long before Ezra Miller came out, so
yeah
that's why also why they're playing a male role, and it's
yeah.
yeah.
And I also love like Elliot's brother. I do love, who is the one who like is like on the spectrum of autism. I forget his name is Ben, and
I really like him though. Yeah,
he's so sweet, and like he's like super honest, and like I love the moment where he has like with his mom Ellen Barkin, where she's like, is it me, am I the issue, like because of all this? And he's like, well, I was thinking about it, and like you
he's
know
literally
what,
like yeah, like I did the calculations, and you are the common
yeah,
denominator.
I know.
But
And
she's just like I love you so much, and
yeah,
they
she like
hug, and it's
smiles.
amazing.
Yeah, because he's like very like honest and upfront. He's like, well, you know what, Alice is fucked up, we're fucked up. The only one who was okay was Dylan, and you didn't raise
You
him.
didn't raise
So
him.
yeah, you're the one who you're the problem. And she's
Yes,
like, I love you. She's like, which is great because, and then there's like little moments too where he's is him just kind of trying to understand the family too, but kind of keeps to himself, where he tries to get into like the adult conversations and stuff, and then they kind of treat him like shit too, where they're just like, what is this Doogie Howser? And he's like, well, no, he was a resident surgeon, not like
right. And then
anything
there's a
else.
moment later where it's like I think he's talking to his brother, is Ezra Miller, and he's like he was like I thought I had Asperger's, which is
Yeah,
like something that's not diagnosed anymore, but it's like
yeah,
it was considered a milder form of autism, but
yeah,
on the spectrum. And he was like, but do I have like, am I fully autistic? Which like the answer is yes, but like at
yeah,
the time people didn't know that.
yeah,
And Ezra Miller's like, what are you talking about? And he was like, well, like our aunt said that. And Ezra Miller, and he was like, in front of you? And he was like, they thought I couldn't hear. And it's like, they're just like literally talking shit about Ben, the youngest child in the family, in front of him, and like
yeah,
because it's like, and it's like a thing like how people treat like disabled people like they're accessories, and like they're
yeah,
not really, or like furniture, and it's like, oh
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I mean that, and I think it's like also Bonnie and Donna are always drunk and talking shit about people to them, their like face too, like not even like, and they think it's funny, they think it's a joke, and I know family members that are like this too, so it's like where they're just like, because I had like some family members that used to make fun of one of my cousins, like when he was like around too, like call him like a dope or like an idiot, stuff like that.
yeah.
It's like, and that is harmful to these kids, and like growing up, being treated like a fucking joke, and that's gonna probably damage them later on. But luckily, Ben, I think, at least get some answers, and Elliot's there to be like, no, like don't listen to them. So Paul ends up showing up to the Paul is Lynn's ex-husband, the dad of Dylan and Alice, so the
Who
abusive
took
husband.
Dylan and beat Ellen and then married
Yes,
Demi Moore.
Demi Moore, yeah, who is Patty is her name. So
And
they show up because they're hanging out for like the weekend. I think they probably have their own like hotel situation and come in.
but they like keep coming by the house and
Yeah, because
talking
Doris, the
shit.
grandmother, always invites Paul over, like, oh, you should come over for a cup of coffee and hang out, as if like, you didn't beat the shit out of my daughter, because
And like
Doris likes to
meanwhile,
pretend.
Ellen Barkin, as well as the daughter Alice, have been like working with therapists just to get to the point that they can see the father. And Ellen
Yeah,
Barkin's like, oh, he's just here. And I'm Ellen Burstyn's, and Ellen Barkin's like, what?
yeah. Yeah, oh, he's coming by. It's fine. We're gonna hang out and have a good talk. And we talk on the phone and then she finds out like, oh, and then like, what was it? Donna's at the table with Lynn, and just like, oh, they talk all the time like this. And it's like, so they just have this like relationship where they're like, hey, how's it going?
Right, like it's as if Paul is her child and not Ellen Barkin.
Yeah, and they ignore the fact that he beat the shit out of it and ruined the entire family and her children. And
There's a fantastic moment that is, I wrote down, like I feel like it is the crux of the movie. It gives you everything. It is happens like talking about like film structure. It happens exactly halfway through. Like it is the midpoint of the movie, which is always when things kind of reach a boiling point.
Yeah.
And that kind of changes things. And it is when they're sitting there with the parents. It's like Ellen Burstyn's there, Paul and Patty, and Ellen Barkin is like crying, and she's like, I blocked so much of this out, Paul. I need you to answer this question for me. I have a memory of like being in the kitchen and Alice is like clinging to my legs, crying and scared of you, and you punched me in the face. And she was like, did that really happen or did I imagine that? And it's so vulnerable.
And she looks at her mom first, where she's like, now tell me, Paul, looks at her mom, is like, I need you to hear this, goes back to Paul, did this happen? Yeah.
And he just goes, yeah, it did. And then and you're thinking at this point, like, oh, the movie's only halfway over, but you're like, it's got to all end right. Like, this is one of those moments where I was like, how are we going to continue on at this point? Yeah. And Ellen Barkin's dad comes to for a moment, puts his hand on Paul's shoulder and goes, that must have been so hard for you to admit.
Yeah. And then, and you just like, and it goes like Ellen Barkin, who's just like completely defeated. Like she thought she finally had her moment to be like, see, I fucking told you. But then it goes back to like, it's not your fault, to the guy. And she's like,
to the man who hit. And Demi Moore, his current wife, is unconcerned, is like mad at Ellen Barkin the entire movie, and is like towards the end, it even is like, oh, she's a horrible whore, we're trying to break up my perfect family.
Yeah. And like you see
that, it's like one of those moments where it's like, these people are so dysfunctional that even the therapist is, you know, it's bad when the therapist is like, oh God. And I have had that moment where I am talking about my family and even the therapist is like, oh wow, this is a bad one.
Oh my. Yes. Yeah, that's like what that's like how it goes. And you're just like, yeah, right. Doesn't it suck? And so that kind of goes over, and then Patty and Paul get invited over, and that's when they have like their little talk in the living room of just like trying to be peaceful. But Lynn's like, this is the moment when I want to be like, hey, we just have to squash this. And that could have been a moment for them to have like a thing to be like, wow, blah, blah, like talk about it a bit, but no one wants to talk about it. They're like, no, this is a wedding.
We don't do that in this movie. Yeah, we don't do that in this family.
Yeah, we're here for a wedding. It's not supposed to be volatile. It's supposed to be happy, good luck times. And it's like, okay, but there's so much going on that we have not discussed yet. Now that we're here,
but really bad things are happening.
Yeah, and you know, it sucks because it's Lynn the whole time being like, am I fucking crazy or is everyone else crazy? And
it is the definition of gaslighting. Like, it's like,
oh yeah, the whole time. So like after that moment when the father's like, oh, it must be good to get off that your chest, like Lynn is literally just broken and walks outside and like just fucking falls apart like under this tree and is like shaking and crying. And then Elliot comes by, and it's a really great moment because you know that Elliot and Lynn clearly they have a relationship. They are, you know, mother and son, and like,
but it's often very contentious.
Yeah, and they're always like butting heads and everything. But you see at a moment that they're both like understanding of just how broken things are together, where he just sits right next to her and then she like puts her head in his lap, and it's like this really beautiful moment that they don't really have with each other a lot because they're usually like fuck you
silence. It's like it's such a juxtaposition from like the loud screaming between them, and it's like, we don't need to talk, this is what, like, we both get each other, we both get how fucked up this is. And actually Ezra Miller has never met Paul.
Oh yeah, the first thing he says,
because Ezra Miller's character is exiting the house, I think, is also like fighting with whatever family member.
Yeah.
And Paul is like at the door and they're like, oh, you're Paul, fuck you, Paul.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, oh, that kid's got a mouth on him. And then she's like, eat shit, Paul. Like Lynn says it. And he's like, and she's like, I'm sorry. He's like, and then the grandma's like, would anyone like some tea?
Yeah.
Like, it just like, it shows all of them just how, it's a mess. So Lynn, so much going on. Lynn is married to Lee, who is a therapist, and also like that. This is her like new husband, who she had Elliot and Ben with. So
and Alice also calls Lee dad.
Yeah, because Alice has been with them mostly, and Alice has, I think, been into like, she had to have been in the hospital after like going through her like breakdown and cutting herself and stuff like that, because they mentioned that a bit. And Lee arrives with Alice. They both come together, and there's a moment where before Alice like enters like the room of the family, like eating and like chatting and stuff, where Alice is walking in and she like is like, oh fuck, I'm about to enter this whole world that, you know, is so much for me. I have like all this anxiety with all these people and like the judgment and everything, and I know how these people fucking
she
work.
knows what's coming.
Yes, and it's like, and I've been in that situation where it's like, take a deep breath. You gotta
Mhm.
play this kind of character and try to get through this fucking thing. And you have this moment with her before she like walks into the room where she's like, fuck, here we go. And then it's like she walks in and all the chatter stops immediately and it's like dead silence. And they all like look over at her and she's just like, hey.
And it's
then
great. It's
everyone's
like, oh, the freak show's here.
yes,
Look at her funny. She'll kill herself at the table.
exactly. Where like,
So
you know,
ridiculous.
while they're eating at one point, and then like Donna's like, I'll cut your steak for you, grabs the
And
knife.
he starts like reaching over and cutting her steak because nobody wants her to use a knife.
And then Lynn is also, yeah, exactly. And Lynn, her mom is like, be like, Donna, stop that. So it's like, it's even
fine.
like, yeah, it's a thing where it's like she's doing
Horrible.
extra, and then like like Lynn also kind of makes it worse just by being so aggressive with her, be like, don't do that. This is the, like, so it's like,
right, like
they're
Lynn
all
just
bringing
like, hey, it's fine, and she's like shouting across the table.
yeah, so everyone's bringing attention to it, and like, and you know, Alice is just like, I just want to eat my fucking food and get this over with.
Right.
And you know, what is it? Ben has like the younger kid has been like filming stuff every now and again, and like later that night shows Alice like the fight that happened in the living room because he left the camera in there. And so Alice like watching it with Elliot, the other brother, and they're like going through it, and Alice just fucking breaks down, and Ben's like, oh, are you crying? What are you doing? And like it's this like moment where Alice is like, fuck, this is still going on. And like she has to meet up with Paul, her dad, who she refers to as Paul.
Because he's not a person. He literally said to her mom, you can take that one. I'm only gonna take that one if it's to get back at you.
So how do you care for a person like that, especially your own parent who just like is like, oh, I don't need that one.
Right, it's like the definition of this, like abandoned you and failed you.
Yeah, and so it's like,
you're
okay,
supposed to be like, oh, happy wedding, it's dad.
Yeah, and I'm supposed to meet up with this guy who, you know, is my father, like is my dad, but never been like a father. And I have to meet up and have this like awkward ass conversation, which I think is fully unnecessary.
Right, that they're like essentially the family is like making her feel like she needs to do so that the wedding is okay, and that like so that Paul can feel better about himself at his son's wedding.
Yeah, because they have no concern of like how this is actually going to affect Alice or Lynn or like anyone else. So, and then, you know, Alice has been cutting herself, so they also like, she's one of the bridesmaids, and they like, all the bridesmaids have these sleeveless dresses, so then they end up putting these like,
they have to add sleeve. There's like even a moment where one of the aunts is like, you know, they have to add sleeves to her dress.
Yeah, and they make a whole deal out of it, and then but there's a cute moment between which you get to see Alice has like a really good relationship with Elliot, even though Elliot is a mess and has been in like rehab several times. It's like, you know, hit his mom before and like has, you know, had all these like intense like reactions, and but you see them like smoking weed together like at night and just kind of like making fun of each other for their like issues, where she's like, you're so fucked up, blah blah blah, and he's like, oh well, Alice scissor hands, and like says like stuff like that, and like like, oh fuck you, and like, and then they like are like, you know, high in the middle of the night trying to go through and like make like pizza rolls or some shit, and I'm like, this reminds me of like me and my brother at like,
and then they also realized that like they've removed every knife, and she was like, I don't think access to a butter knife is not gonna be a problem. And it's like Lynn makes a point of saying multiple times that she was cutting herself with a razor. And it's like, can't have the butter knife.
Sharp objects, and it's like, and it's this really cute moment between the two of them where you get to see like, oh, they've like grown up together and they have this like relationship with each other, and it's one of these very cute like fun little moments, and then it's immediately killed by the fact that you hear the grandpa upstairs screaming, and so they run upstairs and the grandpa's having pain. An issue, and then you see like the hurt in Doris Ellen Burstyn's face where she's like, fuck, I'm dealing with this again.
There's like this close-up moment on her face where she's just like, because it's like she's in pain watching the person she loves go through it, but she's also like, I personally can't deal with seeing him go through this anymore. Like it's just like there's a lot of emotions on Ellen Burstyn.
And it's very upsetting, and you know, he ends up, I think, maybe in the hospital for a bit, and then like
they
comes
take
back
him to
for
the
the wedding.
Hospital for like, he essentially he gets out right in time for the wedding.
Thomas Hayden Church, I think, is so great in this because he's just like a droning dad and just kind of boring and doesn't really understand. And I'm like, I know this guy too. And I'm just like, and he's just like, hey kiddo, like coming in for a hug and stuff. And
he goes, I'm gonna come in for a hug, and I'm like watching, and I'm like, don't fucking touch her.
I know, and she's like, and then, you know, he tries to have this like superficial conversation, and she's just like, and he's like, oh, are you studying stuff, is it interesting? And she's like, yeah, it is
And she's
interesting.
literally like child
Yeah, and
psychology.
he's like, oh yeah, because your mom and the therapist and all that stuff. And she's like, okay. And then and also Paul and Patty have two kids, like two girls, and
Yes.
one of
These
them
two
is
insufferable
horrendous.
teenage girls.
Yes, and
Yeah.
she
One is worse than the other.
yes, absolutely. Because one's much younger, and then like Elliot takes him away. He's like, I'm gonna go tell them about all my crazy ideas about organized religion, and he's like, oh, that kid's a weird one. Anyways, and like so then they have the rehearsal wedding where
Yes.
Dylan already told Lynn that I want you to walk me down the down the aisle, like, because you're my mother, even though Patty's
Right.
been there for me most of my life, you're still my mother.
You are my
This
mom.
is
Yeah.
really beautiful thing. And Lynn's
Yeah.
like, oh, and but then for some reason, did Patty not get the
It
hint?
was like
Did no
they
one
held
tell
off on
her?
telling Patty until the last minute, probably because they didn't want to deal with her reaction to
Yeah.
it.
And I
And
think maybe they assumed that like she would understand, like, oh,
or
my
that she
mom.
right that she would have some wherewithal that
But
like
like
mom is
tell
here.
her. I did feel bad for her because it's like you should have like at least like let her know, like she should know what the plans are.
The one thing you can say about Patty is that she did take in someone else's kid as her own and treated him really well.
Yeah,
But it is like last minute to the point where they are about to rehearse walking down the aisle, and Lynn is standing on one side and Patty is on the other side, and she's
Dylan
like,
in the middle. Yeah.
yeah, and she's like,
Yeah. And then she ends up getting so offended where she's just like,
yes,
I was there for him and you weren't. Like, but it's like, well, she wasn't there for a fucking reason because
right, it is your
your
husband's
husband
fault,
is a
and
piece
you
of
are
shit.
continuing to defend him, and you know what he did to her.
Yes, and it's this horrible thing where it's like but I think it's because she also has her like own ignorance to it because she didn't know him in the past and knows this other version where it's
Yes.
like, okay, but you didn't go through the pain and like the development of, I guess, that happened later. It's like you like Lynn
Yes.
had to deal with the worst moments of this guy while you got the happy
The
ending.
reward,
Yeah.
essentially.
And so it's like, yeah, but you don't recognize exactly the kind of abuse and shit that he put us all through. And it's like, that's not helping any situation. And you just want
Right.
us to get over it as well. And it's like, no, you didn't
Right,
have to
because
go
like
through this.
Patty is currently benefiting from the situation. So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah.
And it sucks because it's also like, this is Dylan and Heather, his fiance, who's about to be
Yes.
the wife. It's like their moment. It's supposed to be a really beautiful thing for them, and it's just kind of at every moment there's just butting heads, and like they're just like trying to get through this. Paul like taps like Patty. It's like, let's go get some air, and she's like, we are outside, Paul. Back off. I was like, that's so fucking funny. And then so then that night they have the like rehearsal dinner, or like just a dinner of everybody at this restaurant. And this is where shit fully kind of goes down.
Right, because at this point we are hurtling towards the wedding moment.
Yes.
And we're finally starting to see some consequences in the interactions and like people holding shit in.
Yep. Yeah. So we have Elliot with the two daughters of Patty and Paul outside, the cousins, Elliot's brother, Ben, and Ben says something that kind of embarrasses Elliot, where it's like, oh, you know how to do the Macarena, but means it in all sincerity. It's like, and you're really good, and blah blah blah. And then Elliot takes that as like, cool. Oh, you just embarrassed me in front of these girls and blah blah. So then he like calls him like the R word and like really like hurts him in that moment, uses that like against him, and then Ben goes inside and just kind of hangs out with the adults for the rest of the night and is just sitting there.
It's fucked up because like Elliot was like Ben's only like real ally before then. He was like the one telling Ben like, don't let them talk shit about you. There's nothing wrong with you. Like, it's fine that you're autistic. Like,
yeah. And then turned it into a joke like everybody else. And it's like, okay. Right. And then poor Ben has to go there and listen to, his dad, Lee, who's just like, I love jazz and Michelob Ultra. It's like, I love that character too. He's so ridiculous. He also has that moment in bed with Lynn where he's like, I can't believe they were so excited about that cowboy dog with the hat and the whole
he goes like cowboy dog.
Yeah, and Lynn's sitting there going like, and this is going on and blah blah blah. And he's like, yeah, that dog. And she's like, are you fucking listening to me?
Cowboy dog.
So it's fantastic. Also, bouncing back before the rehearsal dinner, the night before the like rehearsal wedding.
Yes.
best part of the movie. Best.
I was gonna say this is what. Yeah. Yep.
This is the reason to watch. Is
It is the finest acting moment in the movie.
It is incredible. Ellen Burstyn is in the middle of the night.
Because I think this is like they've just taken her husband to the hospital, so now
Yes.
she's back home overnight. Yeah.
Yes, she's in the kitchen, just middle of the night, everyone's sleeping. Ellen Barkin comes down, her daughter, to get Lee, her husband, some sleepy time tea. So she comes down and turns on like the kitchen light, and the grandma's like, no, don't turn that light on. I never use that light. And I'm like, oh my God, that reminds me of my grandma. Just simple little things like that.
Yeah.
And then everything just kind of comes to a point where Ellen Burstyn, who's been trying to hold everything together as much as possible and like try to ignore all the drama, which should not have been done, but she's just like, I want everything to be okay. It's like, but it's not. That's the thing. It's not okay. But she goes through all the like loops and stuff of trying to pretend like it is. Mm-hmm. This is her breakdown moment where she's just like, has a breakdown. My husband's about to die. I can't live with, like, I'm so afraid of there being silence, and I'm not going to be like, he's not going to be here. I don't know what I'm going to do. Everything's a mess. I miss the man I married. And it's like this really
because she's like, the bed isn't empty, but she's like, in a way it feels like he's already gone. She was like, I don't know how it got this way. And it's devastating. Oh,
I like was bawling when and this is me when I was high off of a fucking like weed brownie, and I was like, just like losing it, because
I was just like, I felt so like,
yeah.
It's so funny because one of the best parts of Requiem for a Dream is Ellen Burstyn sitting at a kitchen table with her adult child, finally having a breakdown about like why, like what her life has turned out to be. Like, if you've seen Requiem for a Dream, they're like, I just wanted, like, it's a reason to get up in the morning to fit in the red dress. So I want to be on the show. And it is probably, if I had to pick the most devastating moment of cinema, for me, it's that. I literally said to, because Sam, my partner, has seen this movie years ago at Cody's recommendation, and then I had just never seen it. And so Sam and I were talking about it afterwards, and I was like, we love an Ellen Burstyn kitchen table breakdown.
Yes. I think that's like in her contract now. It's just like, I need me a sad monologue that I can rock this shit. The mom has been like treating things differently and like has a terrible way of dealing with stuff. But then you like get this moment and you see her like as like how she is, how she faces things. And it's like, though it may not be the right way, it's still devastating, and you feel for her. And like
every character is a bad person, but if they're just shitty people, it's not interesting. Like, everybody does have a reason why they are the way they are.
Yeah. And it may not be, and it may be clear where it's like, oh, you have these issues that you just haven't focused on, but you can understand why they haven't, because it is very real, and you know people who do the exact same fucking thing. That's the thing, is like, it's so relatable. So it's like, even if that's why I'm like, I've heard some people, it's a very divisive film, which is very strange, but I can also understand it because it is very dramatic. But like, having lived in the moments where it's like there's nothing but drama when the family gets together, it's like it's hard to be like, oh, it's too over the top. It's like, yeah, but this happens. Like, this is like what goes down. And you unfortunately
can understand why someone like Ellen Burstyn is like, there's that member of the family who's like, I don't care what I have to ignore or normalize, I cannot take another blow up. And especially because it's like, these are all her children, and she's like, I don't care if it's fake, I just need everything to pretend to be okay.
And at the very end of this monologue, she's like sobbing, and then she's like, oh, you got me, this is what you came here for, wasn't it? Like, storms off,
and she like immediately it's like, first of all, it is also manipulative and shitty that she's crying and opening up to her daughter, because when her daughter did that earlier to talk about being abused, Ellen Burstyn was not there for her. And then you're like, oh, you want to cry to your daughter now? And it's like, oh, but it is really sad. And then immediately snaps back, and it's like, and Ellen Barkin's just like left there like crying.
Just it's a mess. So before the wedding, we have the nighttime dinner thing. And that is where I'm trying to just, okay, so a few things happen. Paul and Alice finally have like an actual conversation, like a little bit deeper conversation together next to like the hostess stand. And this is something I find strange. This was one moment especially where I found it kind of weird, where like I almost felt like Alice was maybe miscast, because there is a weird kind of, and I know it's not supposed to probably come off this way, but it feels like it, that Alice is kind of being rather sexual in a way. And it's just her demeanor of like, where she's just kind of like, and she's like kind of clinging onto it. And I don't know if it's just my perception of her being absolutely beautiful and like being nervous that just kind of comes off as flirtatious, but
Well, I
it's a
do think the
weird
way
energy.
she is direct. Yeah, I think it has to do maybe with the way Kate Bosworth is directed and then
Yeah.
interprets those directions can
Yes.
be read in like one way or another, maybe
Yeah.
not
Because then
intentionally, but that's how it's like maybe comes across to some viewers.
yeah, there's a child because it's supposed to be like more of like a childlike kind of like nervousness of like, hey,
Mhm.
maybe my dad wants to hang out with me. But the
Yeah.
way it comes off with her doing it and like just like of her age and stuff, like it just comes off as like weirdly flirtatious for me. But then you see what the whole like message is, and then he's like, well, I have to bring my wife because she's my wife. And then she's like,
And that's for me also another one of the most heartbreaking movies because moments in the movie because she has finally been like, maybe I can put things aside and like or like squash things
try
and
to
move on with my dad and have a real relationship. And he's like, well, not without Patty,
yeah, it's
the
like
woman I replaced your mother with.
yeah, it's like we need to form a foundation with our relationship that we have not had. That can be done without Patty right now. We just literally
the
asked for
idea that
one fucking moment with him alone, like
and
to
she's
go.
like, my dad doesn't like me enough.
Yeah,
Like she's like, I am trying so hard to make things work with my dad. And ultimately the message that's received is he doesn't like me enough to hang out with me one-on-one.
he's still choosing Patty over me. I'm still not the first choice. And it's like,
right.
Fuck you. So then of course she's like having a breakdown and like runs to the car. So Ellen Barkin, her mom, is like, okay, well, we gotta leave. So she runs
she
to the
like goes up
bathroom.
to Lee and is like, she goes up to Lee and she's like, get the boys or something like that. She was like, she was like, Alice is hysterical in the parking lot. We have to go.
Yes, and Elliot is at the bar getting drunk because he convinces the bartender to give him shots. So
the
and he's
bartender
17.
literally says, how are you 21? And Elliot goes, I'm gonna level with you. I'm 17, but this is my fucking family. I'm miserable. Please have some sympathy. And the bartender's like, okay.
Pours him like 3 or 4 double shots.
And he's just like downing it. And he's sitting there with Demi Moore and Paul's older daughter, who's the insufferable one. And she's like, oh my God, you drink? And he was like, oh yeah. And I especially when I mix it with like
opiates.
pills.
Yeah. Yeah. And she's like, oh my God, like
You're
just
crazy.
Yeah, your mom's crazy and she's the one who's causing all the drama. So then Elliot, who's
then,
now
like, completely unprompted, it's like you think they're just hanging out and she's just like maybe taken aback by Elle's behavior. And then she goes, okay, so like she was like, first of all, she's like, oh my God, I can't believe you do that. Also, by the way, speaking of crazy people, your mom, like she said, she's like, your mom should let my mom walk Dylan down the aisle.
Yeah, because she raised Dylan and your mom, like, she didn't do that. Like, just like annoying. And then he gets pissed and he's like, you know what's funny? And then we don't see him tell her, but he ends up telling her that like he's like ends up saying that which I think, Lynn said this in a state of rage maybe one day, being like, oh, Demi Moore, like Patty was a crack whore when your dad met her, and a stripper, blah blah blah. And so he tells Patty's daughter this, and so which we find out later when Lynn is in the bathroom and Demi Moore confronts her in the bathroom, is like, get out of the stall, Lynn. And it's like this most intense moment. And then that's when the daughter's like, Elliot says that Lynn says that you were a strip whore, or a stripper and a crack whore when dad met you. Is that true? And then Patty's like, oh fuck. And then like,
of course not, honey.
Yeah,
she's like, mom, that can't be true. You
like,
can't
is that true?
do anything alternative.
See, exactly. So she runs out and like Paul is out there, and like people are kind of like gathered in like the hallway leading from like the bathroom to like the main room, and there's like a little curtain, and so Demi Moore is like, you fucking bitch, comes out there, and it's the two of them kind of just like yelling at each other, and she's like, you tell your kids that you do this, like that I was a stripper and a crack whore? And she's like, no, Elliot's a fucking liar. And she's like, oh, that's a great thing to say about your own fucking children. And then it's like this whole thing, and it's like, and then Paul shows up and he's like, what's going on? And like, and then all of a sudden, like, she's like, she ends up, Demi Moore insults Ellen Barkin's character. I forgot exactly what she says. And then Ellen Barkin is just like, you fucking trailer whore or some shit. And then Demi Moore starts choking her, and there's this whole thing, and they have to like rip them apart. Ellen Barkin runs outside, and it's a great moment because like all the family, her family is like around the car trying to get inside, and like the
no
car
idea what's just gone down. And
no, and she's like,
just upset because her dad's an asshole.
yeah, and then she's like, so Elliot's doing drugs and drinking again, and Elliot's being a smart ass during this moment, even though he knows everyone's very emotional. He's like, oh, you're calling me a motherfucker? Oh, that's gross. I don't want to.
Yeah, he's like that. She was like, you motherfucker. He's like, that's kind of gross, mom.
I know. And he's like making, and she's like, you son of a bitch. She's like, oh, you just insulted yourself. And
yes,
being
so
an asshole, but it's so funny.
Good.
And then she's just like, and then Patty strangled me. And then like, you know, Alice is by the car, like sobbing still.
Yeah.
And then fucking Lee is like trying to open the car and the alarm goes off. He's like, oh, this damn car. He's
like, yeah, this daggone automatic lock.
That's what every time. It's so like awkward and intense because it's like, it's so emotional, but then stupid shit like that like happens where it like brings it to this like dark funny moment, and it's like, oh my god, this is awful.
It's like, oh yeah, this is exactly how ridiculous everyone is being.
Yes,
because the whole movie is building up to the wedding, so you're like, what's going to happen at the ceremony, whatever. And then it cuts to the reception.
It's like the one thing that goes right is like I guess the ceremony, and then it's like, okay, well, we got through that. Now the after party and the big tent outside in this giant fucking yard. These people have so much money. So during this night, right before the family's like coming into the party,
you literally, it's like Ellen Barkin, Lee, and the kids are walking from the wedding reception ceremony to the reception tent.
Yeah,
and this is where it starts to go awry.
Yes, again. So
right, for the 47th time in an hour and 45 minutes.
It continues to get worse, and like so, Elliot is like still being a smartass, being an asshole, and Lynn just gets to the point where she's fucking fed up. She's like, you know what? Go do drugs. Go off. I'm done. I'm fucking done. She was like,
I give up on you.
And he's like, oh, great. Well, fine. I guess I'll go do that then. And then, you know, Alice is like, you're just immature. Why are you like this? And he's like, whatever. So then he gets pissed because the whole family's kind of against him now, even though like, you know, he brought it upon himself, but he also has like all these other issues and stuff. It's just like how he copes as being a smart ass, I guess.
It's very interesting. Something about Elliot's character is you see why he has these issues and why he's acting the way he does. And he's one of the people that for a while you feel the most sympathy towards.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he hates his family so much, they've traumatized him. But there are these moments where he becomes like Paul almost. Like where he abuses his mother. Yeah. And it's like, but this is part of why you're all so fucked up. And it's like, you're going down this path. And it's like.
That's what sucks is like, and they all have like, even like with, like Lee as the therapist and stuff like that, he kind of takes a back seat to the whole parenting thing.
He's like, and he's like not good at helping diffuse the situation.
No, not at all. And Lynn is there holding all the stress, and he's just like, y'all cut it out. So at the actual thing, like, so Ezra Miller, Elliot goes away. We don't see him for a while. So except I think we see him like getting drunk. He steals a bottle of liquor at one point. Like,
he just like walks up while the bartender's turned away and just grabs the whole bottle. So and you're like, well, but this is, and you kind of don't need to see Elliot because you're like, well, we know this is what's gonna happen.
Yeah, he hates it, and he's kind of pissing and moaning around by himself. So we see that. And then so we have like the little ceremony where they're like looking at pictures and stuff of like, you know, Dylan and Heather, and just being like, oh, memories, which there's like, and there's like this, like, and the dad's up there like giving a speech like, oh, bro, I remember with my bride and blah, blah, like, you know, droning and
and he like mentions his own bride, like Demi Moore, and it's like, what, come again, it's like,
yeah, I want to thank her for putting everything together. And there's like a moment where like some of the family like looks back at Lynn, and Lynn's like heads down, just like,
yes.
And that also, I love, there's another throwaway moment, but it's just because I love Siobhan Fallon Hogan, who plays Bonnie, the red-haired aunt.
The redhead,
she like during it, I don't even think you see her, you just hear her. But when they're going through like the pictures and stuff, she goes, ha ha ha, that's me. Like, yes! And I was like, that's fucking perfect. I was like, great. She's just like, ha, I finally get a moment. So then Demi Moore goes up there and does her little like I've I've always felt like Marilyn Monroe, obviously, and then like has this like
That is how she starts her toast.
creepy Marilyn Monroe, Joe DiMaggio comparison between her and Dylan, where she's like, "And I blow you a kiss, and you hit a home run." Well, sometimes, and like, and then she
And then she goes,
decides,
and now you found your own Marilyn, like
yeah,
you're like your next Marilyn Monroe.
yeah,
It is so egregious. Like, this woman wants to fuck her stepson.
I know she's like trying to fuck everybody the whole time. Like that's just like her goal.
Yeah.
So then we get and then after her like little speech, she decides to be a bitch and is like,
Speech.
Lynn, why don't you come up? Everyone give her a round of applause. Give her some
And then Lynn's like, no,
encouragement.
I don't really do this. And she
Yeah.
goes, no, Lynn, come tell a nice story about from when Dylan was little.
Yeah,
You have them too.
yeah.
And this is the moment where I'm like, oh. I literally, I'm sitting there and I'm like, fucking tell him, Lynn. I'm like, fucking tell him that Demi Moore's husband beat you and took the kid from you. But it's like, she's not actually going to do that because one, this family doesn't talk about things, but two, she's not going to ruin this moment for her son.
Yeah, and she's not used to having like maybe that much attention on her either. So it's a weird moment for her where she's like has all this like built up, but she doesn't want to, let it all out, and it's just like, and
she's
she
also
doesn't
already
have
confessed this once before and received no support and validation.
Yeah, and she doesn't have that close of a relationship with Dylan because they didn't really get to grow up with each other and stuff. So
Right.
she only has these little bitty moments. So it's like, while they have all these great memories, she doesn't really have that, even though it is like he is her son. So
right,
she's
like she didn't
trying
get to take him to baseball or whatever.
So she's almost coming to like terms with just like how much she hasn't been able to be there. And so she's like,
Yeah.
I know, I see that you've grown up to be this like, wonderful man, and like I wish
beautiful toast.
Yeah, and it's like really sweet and stuff, but it's also hella awkward because everyone knows just kind of, I think everyone sees how emotional it is, and there's like she like ends up like just kind of leaving the microphone on the floor and like walks off, and no one's like really like clapping or anything. It's very awkward,
right? Because everyone knows that she didn't raise him. Like that's not a secret.
Yeah, exactly. So it's another one of those things, like all this stuff is like unspoken, but we all know what the deal is, and it's just really fucking awkward because we haven't addressed this, and now I'm like having to like take the stand and be fake in front of all of y'all, and I don't really know how to do it, and I don't even know how to create this storyline of me and my son that has never happened. And it's like, so I just have these little things, and it's just really upsetting. So then the night continues, there's like dancing, you can see Bonnie and was it Bonnie and
Donna, right?
Donna are getting drunk, of course. Bonnie and Demi Moore have their little drunken dance with each other, which is great in the background, and that's, you can see, or Patty like getting more like
she's outrageous. Getting like increasingly drunker is in this montage form, and then she's just like grinding on random dudes, and you see Paul just sitting there watching.
Yeah, and that's what I love is like there's this music in the background that's very like somber, where it's like boom, 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 boom. But then you can see like these people that like
too.
And then she's like and like doing
it is a perfect. It is a fantastic.
I love it.
Moment.
Yeah, and like then you see like all these like other like goofy ass like white people in the background like dancing and stuff, and it's like to this like sad music, and it's just great because it's like it's emotional but also ridiculous. And then as this like goes on, you find out that and it like shows like Elliot kind of walking to the bay and getting in an inner tube with I believe more fentanyl. I don't know if we actually see that, but also he's drunk as fuck after drinking.
We also know that Elliot
bottle.
has at least consumed an entire bottle of alcohol, and it is night. It is pitch black. Like you can't differentiate the woods from the water from the sky, and you're like, he's gonna fucking die.
And he drifts away into the river just like in an inner tube, and so then they find out that Elliot is going down the fucking river. So then they start freaking out.
The cousin literally says, he goes, I'm not sure, but I maybe just saw Elliot floating down the Chesapeake Bay in an inner tube. And then everyone's like,
what the fuck? So then they get like a helicopter to
they call it the coast, not the Coast Guard, but like whatever that is. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, the Air Force. They like literally just like a helicopter. I'm like, this family has money, this family has connections. Then you see like a sky shot of like in the helicopter and like a spotlight on Elliot in the bay in the inner tube, just like kind of passed out. So it's like, okay, well, Elliot's not dead.
But maybe. Just when
maybe. But yes, go on.
Then
oh god,
Grandpa,
good old Grandpa is trying to cut that lawn.
Ellen Burstyn's husband, also again completely unconcerned about his grandson, takes this moment while everyone is freaking out to he makes the point of walking. He picks up the dog who has apparently been in attendance at this ceremony.
Yes.
And goes, come on, buddy.
Yeah, we're gonna go
And
cut the lawn.
And it is nighttime, it is dark, and he gets on the lawnmower.
Yeah, like a riding lawnmower.
Driving away. And you're like, oh God. And
almost goes through the tent. Yeah, almost goes through the tent. Yeah.
And at that moment, though, that was my one thing where I was like, if this dog fucking dies, if he hurts the fucking dog, but the dog is fine.
Yeah, dog's okay. But
just disclaimer, the dog is okay.
And it's this like, there's this like, and it's this like beautiful moment where everyone kind of stops, where they see it like going by, and it's like loud and like the noise and stuff. The noise kind of shuts off, and you see the bride and groom like running after the grandfather, and he smacks into a tree, and you don't really know what's happening, because then it's the next day and you find out the grandfather died. The like next moment, it's like a Nina Simone song is like playing, and it's like really fucking beautiful, and it's really somber, and they kind of do a panning of, which you assume is like a sort of funeral. The family is all just kind of like clearly miserable and sad, but earlier in the film there's a moment where Elliot's talking to his grandma about like, there's these, the only time I've ever really felt connected to every member of my family was like 9/11, where it's like it took a tragedy to actually bring people together. I was like, we're having a wedding and it's intense and dramatic and ridiculous. No one's getting along, but it's weird that maybe it takes like death or tragedy to actually bring people together. And that's such a fucked up concept and stuff. And grandma's like, well, that's ridiculous. And it's like, well, it is true, because like, kind of like, or at least in this specific moment, and I can relate to that at times as well, of like, after everything's said and done, after the grandfather dies, you kind of see them all kind of coming together in a weird way, and it may be just brief, but like they have this kind of togetherness,
bonding.
Yeah, exactly. And like there's like a moment at the table, and like the grandma has like the one acknowledgement for the daughter's like pain by just putting her arm on her shoulder and then walking away, and it's like
the most that these people are going to get
the absolute most. And I think that's when Lynn finally realizes that too, where she's like, that's kind of all I'm going to get from my mother, which is just devastating. And it's like, that's all that she can also handle too, probably emotionally, especially after losing her husband just now.
Right.
And it's like,
now is not actually the time to confront your poor old mother.
Yeah. And you don't, and it's a thing where it's like, everyone kind of like, things kind of get thrown into perspective, I think, for all of them. If not, this could be like a moment of change for people, but it's temporary and could just be just in the moment, and things could continue. You don't know, and you don't really have this kind of like happy ending. It's just like you get an ending where there's a bit of togetherness, but it's unfortunately based on someone's fucking death, and not like the marriage that just happened whatever the day before, or we don't really know how much time passed between the two events. But then
you never see them happily celebrate the wedding all together.
No, no. Like even at like
the answer is simply no.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that's never something that's fully celebrated by everyone, or at least like
at the same time, at least.
Yeah, there's still like stuff going on. And then also at the wedding, I forgot to mention, Alice ends up telling Paul to basically just go fuck himself. She wants nothing.
He like walks over and is like, can we have a moment? And she was like, no. And he's like, no, come on. She said, no, Paul. And he was like, okay, I read you loud and clear.
Just like when you were a kid. Yeah, it's like he tries to drop that one little thing where it's like, haha, we still have this. And she's just like, no.
And she's like, no, we're done.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, good. Yeah, so it's like, I mean, that's
right. No, and then the little brother literally turns around and says, that is the most badass thing you've ever done.
I know, and it's great, and it's such a really great moment, but it's also like, it's still very upsetting, because it's like this relationship that could have been just won't. And it's just the duality of all that kind of stuff is nuts. But I think that's with every character too, where it's like there's good and bad to every like thing. And so then this family kind of just wraps up, and it ends with Lee and Lynn in the back of the car, with Ben in the middle, and then Alice driving with Elliot looking out the window after, Elliot putting people through shit too. And I think maybe, he's just kind of looking out the window, like towards the camera, and you think maybe this could be like a change, but it's just because you can see there's like a deep like regret in him, as like at the at the dinner table where like Ellen Burstyn's at the front, and like, you know, where the grandpa probably would be sitting, there's no one there, but she's sitting next to Elliot and Lynn, and there's like a moment where they're the three of them way down at the end, if you can see them, they're like looking at each other, and it's just like a brief moment of just like, you know, some kind of connection that they just haven't gotten. And I think Elliot is finally, maybe this might be the point, like of like a turning point for Elliot, but
Yeah.
who the fuck knows? Maybe it's just temporary.
It's like, yeah, like the end of the film, every character has either grown just an ounce,
Yeah.
or realized something, but there's been no like meaningful change or like happy wrap up. And it's like, I think that's the most real, absolutely the most realistic place for this family to end up.
Yes, exactly. So they just kind of leave it, and you can see when they're like pulling away, you see like Ellen Burstyn's character, like, you know, waving goodbye, and she's like kind of stepping forward, and you see that she does, you know, love them in her own way. It may not be a good way or a healthy way, but she's like,
It's a way.
yeah, it's one of those ways. Yeah, it's like there's, and that's the thing, is like they don't, no one gets like this kind of like kind of like the good person edit. Like they're all,
Yes.
they all get like an appropriate edit of like, you're a fully, you're like a, there's like more dimensions to you than just being good guy, bad guy. It's like you're there's a lot to y'all, and it's like it may not be healthy, and it may not, you may not actually grow or learn, but you know, not everyone does. So it's like, it's very
like
realistic.
A lot of why, yeah, like why in real families people keep coming back to these people that traumatize them, that they don't actually like, because it is so messy and complicated and not just one thing or the other.
Exactly. So it's juggling that and the idea of like family trying to stick together, but also like none of us get along, none of us have any kind of thing in common, but we have this idea that we are family, and we do somewhat care for, we're supposed to, and like we do care for each other in a way, but it's all based off of probably the past, and we've all become different people, and this doesn't really work anymore, but we're supposed to be together. And it's like, it's not really saying like, hey, everything's like happy and go lucky and stuff. It's like family is a mess. It's just a mess, and it's like whether you know, you can kind of deal with it however you wish, and there's no like thing at the end where it's like you have to love each other. It's like, no, especially with Alice's like, fuck you dad, no, or Paul, it's like
rejection of that narrative. It's like, but they're still your parent, and it's like, okay, no,
I don't want that. That's not going to help me in my life at all. Like, it's going to just make things worse. And it's like, so why would I go through that? And it's like, I think you and I also know what that's like, and have had to make those kind of choices, and it's not easy. And that's, I think, why it's like easy to connect to this. And I'm glad we got to actually talk about it.
I know why we can like sit here and pick apart every interaction this family has in the whole movie.
Exactly, because it's just like, oh yeah, remember that moment?
I've been through that.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, so it's very interesting, and I love revisiting this with people and stuff, because I just think it's you know, underappreciated in a way. It's like, even if you don't like care for the family or the structure of the film, I think at least like performance wise, that it's good to see, you know, Ellen Burstyn and Ellen Barkin specifically, just because they do so much, and I think they put in so much work that it's just exciting to see what they do.
Ellen Barkin is just acting her fucking face off, and like she must have been so emotionally drained from doing that role.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I mean, all of it. It's literally just an emotional wreck of a situation. Yes, exactly. Okay, so that was another happy day, and when we come back for the next episode, we will talk about happiness, because we want to give it enough time to talk about, because that's another family that deserves a lot of time. So
a lot of dissection. They have a lot going on,
and we saved the worst for last, and by just you know, a lot to deal with. So thank you. I think
another happy day is the more digestible of the two.
Yeah, exactly. Oddly enough, even though if you've probably heard this, you're like, what the fuck? And it's like, well, it gets worse. So
this is your chance to not come back if you're frightened.
Yeah, so it gets much worse. This was the Disney version of happiness. So there we go, if that makes sense. Okay, and we will be back next time. So thank you, and I will see you during happiness.
Sounds good. Thank you.